The summons alarm echoed through the crystalline corridors of Nexus Station, reverberating at frequencies dozens of different species could perceive. Ambassador Thelkar of the Elder Confederation adjusted his sensory apparatus as he floated towards the Galactic Council chamber, his 3 pairs of compound eyes catching the prismatic reflections of artificial light, simulating the spectrum of 1,000 different suns. Around him, representatives from hundreds of advanced civilizations converged on the same destination, their forms varying from entities of pure energy contained within magnetic fields to crystalline creatures resonating thoughts through harmonic vibrations. Something was wrong. Thelkar could feel the tension permeating the station's processed air. Emergency summons were not uncommon, but the protocol's silence dominating the corridors suggested exceptional gravity. His chemical senses detected the signatures of fear, curiosity, and anticipation emanating from the other delegations. The council chamber was an architectural marvel that defied Newtonian physics, a perfect sphere, 50 kilometers in diameter, where localized gravitational fields allowed each species to occupy its own plane of reference. The ceiling was the floor, was the wall, depending on each delegate's perspective. At the exact center of the chamber, a 3-dimensional hologram could manifest at any point, simultaneously visible from all angles. Thelkar positioned himself on his designated platform, activating the neural translators that would allow for instant communication. Around him, 347 member species delegates did the same. The ambient light gradually dimmed until only the bioluminescent fields of some creatures remained, creating a living constellation of colored points in the darkness. The voice of the lead facilitator, a sentient AI that had served for millennia as a neutral arbiter, resonated directly into the neural cortices of all present. Delegates, the session is officially open. The Vokri Empire requests the right of announcement under the Territorial Expansion Protocol. Thelkar felt his subcutaneous muscles contract involuntarily. The Vokri, expansionist warriors who had conquered 18 star systems in the last 2 decades, technologically advanced, militarily superior, and diplomatically brutal. They respected only strength and viewed negotiation as a sign of weakness. A hologram materialized in the center of the chamber. Warlord Krathvon of the Vokri was imposing even in holographic projection. His chitinous black carapace reflected light like polished obsidian, and his 4 main claws were clenched in a gesture Thelkar recognized as a display of dominance. Behind him, a formation of 20 military officers maintained a rigid posture. Delegates of the Council, I formally declare the annexation of the star system, catalogued as Sol 3, also known locally as the Solar System, the 3rd planet, designated Earth by its native inhabitants, is now under Vokri sovereignty. A collective murmur rippled through the chamber. Thelkar quickly accessed the Council database through his neural interface, Earth, Class M planet, located in a peripheral spiral arm of the galaxy. Technological classification, Level 2, pre-interstellar civilization, estimated population, 8 billion individuals of the dominant species self-identified as Homo sapiens. A primitive civilization, defenseless against any species with superluminal travel capability. The protocol allows for a contestation within 1 standard stellar cycle, Krathvon continued, his voice laden with predatory confidence. Otherwise, we will commence forced integration operations in 72 hours. Forced integration? the Valkyrie euphemism for military subjugation and mass enslavement. Thelkar felt a wave of unwanted memories flooding his consciousness. Images he had tried to suppress for centuries filed in the deepest layers of his segmented mind. The face of a bipedal creature, covered in dark red, eyes wide in silent horror. Small, motionless forms floating in the vacuum. The dead glow of a shattered colonization vessel. He activated his transmitter before he could reconsider. I contest. The silence that followed was absolute. Contestations were rare, especially against the Valkyrie. Thelkar could feel hundreds of sensors and eyes turning towards him. Krathvon rotated his massive body, focusing his primary visual organs on the elder delegate. On what grounds, Ambassador of the Confederation? Direct historical experience with the species in question? Thelkar responded, maintaining his neutral tone despite the chemical turmoil in his nervous system. I possess critical information about the inhabitants of Earth that the Valkyrie Empire needs to consider before proceeding with this action. Krathvon's lower mandible opened slightly, a gesture that could signify both interest and contempt. Explain. Thelkar activated his own holographic projection, sharing data directly with the chamber's central system. A star appeared in the center, then an arid planet, followed by fragments of twisted metal. 643 standard stellar cycles ago, my species encountered a human colonization vessel that had deviated from its planned course due to a failure in its primitive navigation systems. The ship contained 417 individuals in suspended animation. At that time, my civilization was not so different from yours, Warlord. We were expansionist, pragmatic, and viewed other species as resources to be exploited. He paused, letting the implication hang in the chamber's processed air. We destroyed the ship. All humans aboard were killed when we decompressed the suspension modules to access their cryogenic life support technology. We considered the incident insignificant. A pre-interstellar race that could barely leave its own solar system posed no threat or strategic value. And what is the relevance of this historical anecdote? Asked Krathvon with a tone that suggested growing impatience. The relevance, Warlord, is that we were completely wrong. Thelkar expanded the hologram, now showing a sequence of stellar coordinates connected by red lines. A web that stretched across entire sectors of space. 6 cycles after the incident, we began receiving reports of unidentified vessels in our territory, small, fast ships, using propulsion technology we did not recognize. Initially, we thought they were pirates or explorers from another species. We sent patrols to intercept them. The patrols never returned. The hologram shifted, now showing blurred images of space combat, silent explosions, floating wreckage. The incursions continued. They were not mass attacks or territorial invasions. They were precise, surgical. Each attack targeted specific individuals, military officers, scientists who had participated in the analysis of human technology, politicians who had authorized the destruction of the ship. It took us 20 cycles to understand the pattern. Pattern? Repeated a metallic voice from across the chamber. Delegate Catharan, a collective artificial intelligence species. They were not at war with us, Thelkar explained. They were executing sentences. Humans had dedicated 2 decades to tracking down every individual who had any direct involvement in the deaths of their colonists. They infiltrated our communication networks, deciphered our military codes, learned our trade routes. And then, methodically, systematically, they hunted down every responsible party. Impossible, declared Krathvon. A primitive species does not possess the capability for interstellar intelligence operations of that magnitude. Thelkar emitted a sound the translator interpreted as a bitter laugh. That was precisely our miscalculation. The humans we encountered on that colonization vessel were indeed technologically primitive, but they possessed something we underestimated: an accelerated cognitive learning capacity unparalleled in known organic species, and an emotional motivation that transcends strategic logic. They don't just fight for territory or resources, they fight for abstract concepts. Justice, vengeance, memory of the dead. The hologram now showed a planet, green and blue, with vast oceans and familiar continents. For 70 cycles, humans hunted us, not with battle fleets or weapons of mass destruction, with patience, with planning, with a determination that did not wane with the passage of time. Each generation transmitted to the next. The names, the coordinates, the blood debts, they transformed the pursuit of justice into a cultural institution. And the outcome? Asked the lead facilitator. Eventually, our own civilian population demanded that we negotiate. The economy was bleeding. Trade routes were abandoned. Officers refused to serve in specific posts for fear of being next on the list. We were forced to surrender all remaining individuals who had participated in the incident for judgment under human laws. Surrender, spat Krathvon. Your species surrendered to primitives. Our species learned, Thelkar calmly corrected. We learned that there are forms of power that do not manifest in war fleets or superior technology. Humans possess something that most of us lost throughout our technological evolution. They remember every name, every injustice, every debt, and they never, ever forgive without demanding accountability. He deactivated the hologram and focused all his sensors on Krathvon. You intend to bomb their cities, enslave their survivors. You believe that a massive display of force will break their will. But I tell you, Warlord, that every human you kill will not weaken the survivors. On the contrary, every death will fuel a fury that transcends generations. You will not be conquering a planet. You will be creating an empire of avengers who will dedicate centuries, if necessary, to ensure that every responsible Valkyrie faces justice. Frightening tales for hatchlings, Krathvon scoffed. Our fleet is positioned. Our technology is superior. In 72 hours, Earth will be just another tributary of the Empire. He cut the transmission abruptly, his holographic projection dissolving into particles of light. Thelkar remained on his platform, feeling the weight of 346 other presences around him. The lead facilitator initiated voting procedures, but Thelkar knew the outcome. The Council would not interfere. They would not risk confrontation with the Valkyrie for a primitive civilization that didn't even have a seat in the assembly yet. He transmitted one last coded message to the Confederation's historical archives, marked to be opened only in 100 cycles. A simple message. I warned them. As the chamber began to empty, Thelkar gazed through the force field windows at the starry vacuum beyond. Somewhere in that immensity, orbiting an ordinary yellow star in an unimportant spiral arm, 8 billion humans continued their lives, completely oblivious to the storm about to descend upon them, and completely underestimated in their capacity to survive it. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, of the United States Aerospace Defense Command was finishing her shift when the satellite detection systems began to emit alerts she had never seen in 15 years of service. Her workstation at Peterson Air Force Base lit up with red markers appearing simultaneously in high, medium, and low orbit. "I have multiple unidentified signatures," she reported through the communicator, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Distribution pattern suggests deliberate strategic positioning does not match any known assets of any nation. The response came from General Martinez in the Central Command Room. "Confirm visual. Reconnaissance satellites. Maximum priority." Sarah redirected 3 orbital observation satellites to the primary coordinates. The image that formed on her main screen caused her brain to freeze for 3 full seconds, rejecting what her eyes clearly saw. They were ships. There was no other suitable word. Metallic structures the size of mountains, suspended in the vacuum with a geometry that defied the principles of aerodynamics. Black surfaces that absorbed light, punctuated by luminescent formations that pulsed in regular patterns. 37 of them positioned in a siege formation around the planet. "General," her words came out in a whisper, "we need to evacuate coastal cities, now." But it was already too late. In London, it was 7 in the morning. The megalopolis buzzed with 13 million people starting another day. Bullet trains departed from stations with chronological precision. Glass towers reflected the rising sun. No one looked up until the shadow began to form. The Valkyrie ship that positioned itself over the British capital was 3 kilometers long. It descended slowly through the atmosphere, its thermal shields converting air friction into a spectral blue-green glow. Emergency alarms began to sound throughout the city, but there was no protocol for evacuation. Where to run when the entire sky was blocked? The bombardment did not come from missiles or torpedoes. The Valkyrie ships utilized antimatter projection technology contained in magnetic fields, firing concentrated beams that could instantly vaporize molecular structures. When the first beam hit the Canary Wharf district, there was no dramatic explosion. There was simply absence. 100-story buildings dissolved into ionized atoms. Centuries-old structures, historical monuments, infrastructure that had taken decades to build, all ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. Sarah Chen watched through satellite feeds as the same scene repeated in New York City and Los Angeles. 3 of the planet's largest population centers being erased from the map. Sensors showed only extreme thermal signatures where entire neighborhoods once stood, then nothing. Spectral silence on communication frequencies that once pulsed with millions of simultaneous conversations. She didn't cry. Not yet. The chemical shock in her brain temporarily suppressed the ability to process the magnitude of the loss. Her military mind automatically began to calculate. Conservative estimate, 40 million people, 20% of global industrial infrastructure, 30% of humanity's advanced technological capacity. And then, the transmissions began. The voice that echoed through all planetary communication systems was not exactly a voice. It was a pattern of electromagnetic pulses that automatic language translators converted into comprehensible words in every Earth language simultaneously. The technology was so far beyond human capability that it seemed magical. Inhabitants of the planet designated Earth. Your world has been incorporated into the Valkyrie Empire. Resistance will result in additional elimination of population centers. Military forces must surrender immediately. Governmental leaders have 12 hours to declare formal submission, or more, cities will be selected for demonstration of power. Sarah typed frantically, cataloging the orbital positions of the enemy ships. Each was positioned to have direct line of sight with at least 2 major capitals: Paris, Edinburgh, Sydney, Mumbai, Cairo, Toronto. There was no time for contingency plans. There was no viable counterattack. Humanity had supersonic fighters and ballistic missiles. The enemy had ships that could vaporize entire cities from space. The 12 hours that followed were the longest in human history. In situation rooms around the globe, leaders faced the impossible choice between submission and extinction. Some nations wanted to fight, to throw everything they had in a last act of defiance. Others argued for preservation, save what could be saved, survive to perhaps resist another day. UN Secretary-General Maria Okonkwo was the one who finally made the transmission. Her voice trembled, but the words were clear. In the name of humanity, we accept the terms, cease the attacks. We will discuss terms of surrender. The response was immediate and brutal in its efficiency. Military forces will be dismantled. Governments will be dissolved. Populations will be redistributed to designated labor zones. From this moment, there are no longer earthly nations. There is only the Earth sector of the Valkyrie Empire. Sarah Chen watched as General Martinez received the stand-down order. She saw silent tears streaming down the face of the man who had dedicated 40 years to defending his country. She saw the defeated expression on the faces around her. But while everyone around her processed the defeat, Sarah felt something different beginning to burn in her chest. It wasn't despair, it was anger. Cold, calculating, patient. She had a younger brother in New York City, a brother who had probably been vaporized along with 15 million other people. She had friends in London, military academy colleagues in Los Angeles, all gone in a matter of minutes by a species that considered humans disposable resources. Over the following weeks, Valkyrie troops landed en masse. Their occupation forces were efficient and impersonal. Humans were catalogued, processed, and redistributed. Those with technical skills were sent to manufacturing complexes where they would learn to produce components for imperial machinery. Those with physical strength were directed to mining operations. Intellectuals and scientists were segregated to research facilities where they would be forced to adapt human knowledge for Valkyrie benefit. Sarah was classified as a systems technician. They sent her to an industrial complex in the region, formerly known as Texas, along with 3,000 other humans. The complex was a prefabricated, modular structure assembled in a matter of days by Valkyrie technology, collective dormitories, automated cafeterias, workstations where pieces of alien machinery awaited assembly. Valkyrie guards were few. 5 soldiers to supervise 3,000 workers. They didn't need more. Their technology was so superior that rebellion seemed futile. Energy force fields surrounded the perimeter. Sensors detected any unauthorized movement. Surveillance drones patrolled constantly, but the Valkyrie made a critical mistake. They assumed that terror and defeat were enough to ensure obedience. On the third night, Sarah met Marcus Foster. He had been a propulsion systems engineer at NASA before there was no more NASA. Tall, thin, with eyes that still carried a spark of intellectual curiosity despite his exhaustion. "Did you see those power conduits?" he asked quietly during the evening meal, discreetly pointing to to the pillars that fed the perimeter force fields. Three-phase pulse pattern, similar to what we were experimenting with fusion 5 years ago, but stabilized with something I don't recognize. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Marcus wasn't just observing, he was analyzing, learning. "Can you replicate it?" she asked in an even lower voice. "Not yet, but I can learn. We all can." That night, in crowded dormitories around the occupied world, similar conversations began to happen. Physicists discussing in whispers the composition of alien materials, engineers memorizing construction patterns, programmers trying to decipher the logic behind Valkyrie control systems. The conquerors saw submissive workers. What they didn't see was a species that had developed science and technology not through millennia of gradual evolution, but through centuries of explosive, competitive progress. A species that learned by doing, that improvised, that adapted. A species that, when placed in direct contact with superior technology, did not surrender. It studied. Sarah Chen, sitting on her rigid bunk while others slept around, opened a small notebook she had managed to hide during processing. On the first page, she wrote 3 names: her brother, her 2 best friends. Below the names, she wrote a single word: justice. Not now, not tomorrow, but someday. The Valkyrie had conquered Earth in a matter of hours, but they were about to discover that occupation and victory were very different concepts when it came to humans. 6 months after the occupation, Valkyrie Commander Thalrex sent his quarterly report to High Command. The conquest of Earth was proceeding according to expected parameters. Productivity in manufacturing facilities reached 82% of established goals. Mining operations on 3 continents extracted rare metals with acceptable efficiency. Organized resistance was statistically insignificant. What he did not mention in the report, because his sensors did not detect it, was that at that exact moment, 500 resistance cells were operating in complete silence around the occupied planet. And Sarah Chen was about to lead the first demonstration of what humans learned when they had enough motivation. The manufacturing facility in Texas produced components for Valkyrie ship navigation systems, delicate work that required molecular precision and an understanding of advanced quantum physics. The occupiers initially tried to fully automate the process, but found that certain calibration steps required intuition that their AIs could not efficiently replicate. Ironically, human hands and human brains were more effective for that specific task. Sarah worked at Station 17, assembling superluminal navigation circuits. Over 6 months, she had memorized every component, every connection, every energy pattern. Marcus Foster, 3 stations away, did the same with propulsion systems. Around them, 200 other workers performed similar tasks with an obedience that the Valkyrie guards interpreted as resignation. It was precisely the opposite. During nightly breaks, in strategically positioned corners out of reach of surveillance sensors, small groups gathered. They did not discuss grand plans of armed rebellion. They discussed physics, engineering, chemistry. They shared observations about how alien technology worked. They drew diagrams in the dust. They memorized specifications. Professor Kim Soo-jin, who had previously taught theoretical physics in Oxford, explained in the whispers the implications of antimatter containment fields. Dr. Yuri Volkov, a former materials specialist from Roscosmos, had identified the composition of Valkyrie energy shields through spectral analysis using only ambient light. Elena Rodriguez, a software engineer, was gradually deciphering the communication protocols between surveillance drones by observing transmissions patterns. Humans did what they did best when confronted with technology they didn't understand. They reverse-engineered through observation, experimentation, and collaboration. On the night Sarah had marked on the improvised calendar she kept hidden under her mattress, everything converged. The work shift ended at 1800 hours. Workers were escorted to cafeterias for the standardized meal, then to dormitories. Valkyrie guards performed predictable routines. 2300 hours. Shift change. 2315 minutes. Recalibration of perimeter sensors. Precisely 4 minutes and 38 seconds, where there was a minimal window of opportunity. Sarah met Marcus in the corridor between the dormitory blocks. One look was enough. "Now," she whispered. Marcus nodded to 3 other engineers. They moved with the practiced ease of months of silent planning, each carrying small components they had diverted over weeks. A resistor here, a capacitor there. Parts that individually were insignificant, but together could create something revolutionary. The first target was a surveillance drone. The Valkyrie used hundreds of them, small football-sized devices that floated through corridors, constantly scanning. Elena had discovered that their transmission frequencies operated in regular cycles. During the recalibration of the main sensors, the drones sent confirmation signals to the central control, a signal that could be spoofed if you knew exactly how. Marcus connected the improvised device to the external maintenance access of a drone hovering near Dormitory C. The apparatus they had built was primitive compared to Valkyrie technology, but it didn't need to be sophisticated. It just needed to create enough interference on the right frequency. The drone trembled, its sensors flashing erratically. For 17 seconds, it transmitted corrupted data to central control. 17 seconds where an entire section of the complex became effectively invisible to surveillance. Sarah ran, not to escape, but to reach a specific point on the perimeter where, according to Professor Kim's calculations, the force fields had a micro-fluctuation of energy during recalibration cycles. She carried a small transmitter, built from civilian radio parts that had been confiscated but not completely destroyed. The message she transmitted lasted only 4 seconds. A coded signal on an ultraviolet frequency that passed through the shields during the brief moment of fluctuation. The message contained no attack plans or calls for help. It contained data, technical specifications about Valkyrie force fields, composition of shield materials, facility security protocols. On the other side of the planet, in a mining facility in the Rocky Mountains, 23 other similar transmitters sent comparable information. In industrial complexes in Alaska, Nevada, Australia, humans performed coordinated but independent actions. The network was being born. When Sarah returned to the dormitory, 16 seconds before the sensors returned to normal operation, she looked like just another exhausted worker returning from the communal restroom. The Valkyrie guards noticed nothing abnormal. How could they? By their logic, defeated slaves possessed no organizational capacity for coordinated resistance. But 3 days later, something inexplicable happened at a Valkyrie outpost in the Kepler 442 star system. The refueling station, located 120 light-years from Earth, suffered a catastrophic failure in its life support systems. Initial investigation suggested sabotage, but there was no way an enemy force could penetrate that sector of Empire-controlled space. What investigators did not discover was that 3 months earlier, a Valkyrie freighter had stopped at Earth to load manufactured components. Among the thousands of parts loaded, 23 contained microscopic modifications. Modifications that Sarah and her team had carefully implemented. Alterations that took 3 months to manifest when certain circuits heated to specific temperatures during routine operation. The defective parts caused a cascading failure in the atmospheric filtration systems. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be immediately traced, just gradually reduced efficiency until oxygen levels dropped below the safe threshold. The crew had to evacuate. The station was abandoned. An isolated incident, technical malfunction, bad luck. Except that 2 days later, a communications facility in the Gleaser system suffered a similar outage. And then a military base in TRAPPIST-1. And then a research center in Proxima Centauri. The pattern was so subtle that Valkyrie High Command took 5 weeks to realize they were not coincidences. All affected systems had been equipped with components manufactured on Earth in the last 6 months. Commander Thalrex received the investigation order with genuine confusion. Humans were primitive. They barely understood basic physics when the occupation began. How could they be sabotaging technology that was light years beyond their capacity? He ordered rigorous inspections of all Earth facilities. Security teams combed dormitories, confiscated any written material, interrogated randomly selected workers. They found nothing, because there was nothing physical to find. The knowledge was in the minds, in the memories of thousands of scientists, engineers, and technicians who had dedicated their entire adult lives to studying and understanding complex systems. And now, they had the perfect motivation to apply that knowledge. That night, Sarah wrote 3 more names in her hidden notebook. They were not victims. They were Valkyrie officers, identified through communication intercepts as directly responsible for the initial bombings. The list was growing. And contrary to what the conquerors assumed, humans had long memories and infinite patience when it came to justice. Orbit around Earth, the Valkyrie command cruiser continued its regular patrols, its sensors focused on detecting external threats. They did not detect that in the facilities below, the true threat had already begun to operate. A threat that did not come from weapons or fleets, but from something far more dangerous to an arrogant empire. Human intelligence applied with singular purpose. 2 years after the occupation, Valkyrie High Command faced a problem that defied all military logic. 15 critical facilities had been compromised in 9 different star systems. The losses were significant enough to impact operations, but not massive enough to justify panic. The pattern suggested coordinated sabotage, but no intelligence indicated the presence of enemy fleets or infiltration by other galactic species. The only connection between all incidents was Earth. Vice Admiral Kreshmal of the 2nd Battle Sector convened an emergency meeting on the flagship Eternal Dominator in orbit around the Valkyrie homeworld. Around the holographic situation table, 20 senior officers observed the 3-dimensional map of Imperial territory marked with red points, indicating compromised facilities. "Confirm the obvious for me," Kreshmal said, with his equivalent of a frustrated sigh. A primitive species that could barely leave its own planet is apparently conducting asymmetric warfare operations across multiple star sectors. The silence that followed was eloquent. No one wanted to be the first to admit they had seriously underestimated humans. Intelligence analysis suggests infiltration through the supply chain, reported Internal Security Officer Velkara. Components manufactured on Earth are present in 73% of the affected facilities. Inspections reveal microscopic modifications that cause systemic failures under specific operational conditions. Modifications that our own technicians did not detect during quality control, added another officer. Kreshmal focused his attention on the hologram of Earth, the small blue planet that should have been a trivial conquest. Suspend all imports of terrestrial components immediately. Implement alpha-grade inspection protocols on all merchandise originating from the Earth sector, and bring me complete data on the planetary resistance. The reports that arrived in the following hours painted a disturbing picture. Human resistance did not follow conventional insurgency models. There were no direct attacks against occupation forces. There were no attempts at territorial liberation. Instead, humans operated through invisible technical sabotage and information warfare. But what truly alarmed Kreshmal was the latest intelligence report, delivered in a maximum security encrypted file. We have detected coded transmissions originating from Earth on frequencies that require technology beyond pre-conquest human capability. The transmissions are extremely brief and utilize encryption protocols that took us 3 months to partially decipher. The decoded content consists of lists. Lists of what? Asked the Vice Admiral. Lists of names. Valkyrie names, specifically names of officers and commanders who participated in the initial invasion and bombings. We cross-referenced the lists with our military database. Every name corresponds to personnel involved in operations against Earth. We estimate that humans have identified at least 340 individuals. The Valkyrie equivalent of chills ran down Kreshmal's spine. He accessed the list and recognized several names. Friends, colleagues, officers under his command. They are not just sabotaging our facilities, he murmured. They are hunting us. While High Command debated strategic responses 120 light-years away, on Earth, Sarah Chen was executing the next phase of a plan that had taken 18 months to devise. The resistance network had grown exponentially, not through active recruitment, but through mutual recognition. Scientists found scientists. Engineers identified engineers. Each cell operated independently, but shared information through a communication system that utilized entangled quantum transmissions, a technology that humans had theorized before. The conquest, but only managed to implement by observing Valkyrie systems. Marcus Foster, now leading a cell of 50 specialized engineers, had made a critical discovery. The Valkyrie, for all their technological superiority, relied excessively on automated systems. Their ships, stations, and facilities were controlled by interconnected AI networks. It was efficient, but it created a single point of catastrophic vulnerability: access to the source code. For 2 years, human workers forced to maintain and repair Valkyrie systems had silently copied, studied, and finally understood the Empire's software architecture. Elena Rodriguez, working in a communications facility in what was once Arizona, had achieved something that should have been impossible. She hacked a Valkyrie long-distance transmitter. Not completely, not to the point of controlling it, but enough to inject data packets that security systems interpreted as legitimate traffic. Packets that contained viruses specifically developed to exploit vulnerabilities that no species other than humans would think to exploit. Because humans were specialists in something that most technologically advanced galactic species had abandoned millennia ago. Low-level language programming, direct manipulation of binary code, the digital equivalent of surgery with a scalpel instead of a medical scanner. The first victim was Captain Vortex, commander of the ship that had bombed New York City. His personal vessel, a fast corvette, designated for border patrol, suffered critical navigation system failure while transiting between stars. Emergency systems automatically activated, but rescue protocols were mysteriously corrupted. His last transmission was a distress signal that never reached anyone because the transponders had been redirected to empty frequencies. He drifted for 6 days before fuel ran out and life support systems collapsed. He had enough time to understand what had happened, to understand that his death was not an accident, but a planned execution. 5 days later, General Krathvon, second in command of the invasion fleet, died when his personal transport module suffered explosive decompression due to a precisely calibrated structural failure in the hull integrity system. Forensic investigation revealed that the sealing joints had been manufactured on Earth 3 months earlier. Humans were implementing sentences. Sarah coordinated through coded transmissions with cells in 42 different complexes. Each cell had access to the list. Each cell chose its targets based on opportunity and capability. There was no centralized command that could be eliminated. There was no single leader who could be captured. It was a distributed network of individuals motivated by collective grief and a determination to make those responsible pay. Ambassador Thelkar, observing the events unfold through diplomatic channels at Nexus Station, felt a disturbing familiarity. It was exactly as his own species had experienced centuries earlier. The relentless pursuit, the individualized justice, the refusal to accept that superior military power meant immunity. He transmitted a second message to the Galactic Council, this time with an urgency that could not be ignored. The Valkyrie do not understand what they are fighting against. They see sabotage and insurgency. What they face is far more dangerous. It is a campaign of generational justice where every human is simultaneously judge, jury, and executioner. It will not end with territorial surrender. It will not end with peace treaties. It will end only when every responsible individual has been held accountable. The lead facilitator's response was pragmatic. And your recommendation, Ambassador? Immediate negotiation, full reparations, return of autonomy to Earth, and critically, voluntary surrender of all officers on the human execution list for judgment under their own laws. The silence that followed was answer enough. The Valkyrie Empire would never accept such terms. It would be an admission of weakness. It would be validating the idea that a primitive species had the right to demand justice from its conquerors. Then they will continue to bleed, Thelkar calmly observed. System by system, officer by officer, until nothing remains of the Empire except memory and regret. On Earth, Sarah Chen crossed 2 more names off her list. The list now had 340 entries. 63 were already marked as processed. 277 still remained. Time, as she had learned, was just a tool. And humans had plenty of patience when it came to memory and justice. The Empire was beginning to understand the true cost of underestimating a species that turned trauma into determination and grief into unwavering purpose. 5 years after the first bombardment, Admiral Sarah Chen commanded the Earth Liberation Fleet from the bridge of the flagship Memory of New York. It was not a ship built entirely by humans, but rather captured, modified, and improved with a combination of terrestrial ingenuity and adapted Valkyrie technology. Around her, 217 other vessels formed an armada that did not exist 3 years ago. Earth had been liberated 18 months earlier, not through conventional battle, but through the economic collapse of the occupation forces. When every supply coming from space was potentially sabotaged, when every ship that landed had a 50% chance of developing critical failures, when officers began to disappear even in supposedly secure facilities, the occupation became unsustainable. The Valkyrie had withdrawn, but Sarah knew that withdrawal was not justice. As long as a single person responsible for the bombings remained free, the debt would not be paid. Now she observed through the main viewports the Valkyrie homeworld floating in the vacuum. A world of arid continents and shallow oceans orbiting a red dwarf star 120 light-years from Earth, the heart of the Empire, the source of their arrogance, and the final target of the human campaign. The Earth fleet was not alone. Over 5 years, humans had done something no race previously conquered by the Valkyrie had managed. They had formed alliances. It began with the Elder Confederation. Thelkar, moved by his own people's historical guilt, had secured logistical support. Then came the Catharan, collective AIs who appreciated the human analytical approach to problem-solving. Then the Zephyri, a winged species the Valkyrie had subjugated 2 decades earlier, and who saw in humans the opportunity for their own liberation. But the true strength of the Earth fleet did not come from numbers or firepower. It came from something the Valkyrie never adequately understood: information. Captain Marcus Foster, now commanding the cruiser Human Ingenuity, transmitted updated data to the flagship. Admiral, we confirm successful infiltration of planetary communication networks. We have full access to civilian systems, capacity for transmission on all public frequencies when ready. Sarah nodded, watching the holographic countdown timer. 23 hours until Valkyrie orbital defenses were in ideal response position. 23 hours until the Empire could mobilize enough reserve fleets to challenge the Earth Armada. More than enough time for what she planned. Initiate Operation Collective Memory, she ordered calmly. What happened next was something no galactic species had attempted before. Not a bombardment, not an invasion, but a transmission. On every communication device on the Valkyrie planet, on every screen, on every receiver, on every direct neural interface, the same message began to play. Not in human language, but perfectly translated into Valkyrie linguistic patterns through years of study. The transmission began with images. London, before the attack. A vibrant metropolis, full of life, art, culture. Then, the same. Location, vaporizing into blinding light. New York City, Los Angeles. 40 million lives extinguished in minutes. Then the names began, not of victims, but of those responsible. Warlord Krathvon commanded the initial invasion, authorized bombardment of civilian population centers, status executed by life support system failure. Captain Vortex piloted the ship that bombed New York City, directly responsible for 15 million deaths. Status executed by navigation sabotage. General Melchora ordered forced enslavement of civilian populations, supervised separation of families, for labor redistribution. Status: executed by poisoning through contaminated atmospheric purification system. The list continued. 340 names, each with specific details of their actions, each with confirmation of justice applied. Except for the last 73 names, these remained without execution status, because they were all on the planet below. Sarah allowed the transmission to play for 4 hours before adding her own message. Her face appeared on billions of screens simultaneously, translators converting her words in real time. People of Valkyrie, my name is Sarah Chen, Admiral of the Earth Liberation Fleet. 5 years ago, your empire decided that my world and my species were resources to be exploited. You saw us as primitives, defenseless, worthy only of subjugation. She paused, allowing the words to sink in. You were wrong. Not because we are militarily superior, not because we have more advanced technology, but because we possess something your empire forgot throughout its expansion: memory, empathy, and the absolute refusal to accept that massive cruelty goes unpunished. Behind her, holograms showed the 73 remaining officers, their current locations marked with surgical precision. You have a simple choice: surrender the listed individuals for judgment under galactic law, supervised by the Council and witnessed by international observers. They will face appropriate justice for crimes against sentient civilization. Or we remain in orbit and continue the campaign of attrition that has already bled your empire for 5 years. She leaned slightly towards the camera. But understand this clearly. We will not bomb your cities. We will not enslave your population. We will not repeat your atrocities, because we are not you. However, every ship that leaves this system will be sabotaged. Every transmission will be intercepted. Every trade route will be monitored. Your empire will become an economic prison until justice is served. Sarah cut the transmission and waited. The response came not from the Valkyrie government, but from the streets. Professor Elena Rodriguez, now head of Human Intelligence Analysis, reported the first signs 18 hours later. Admiral, we are detecting demonstrations in 12 major population centers. The civilian population is demanding that the government surrender the listed officers. Sarah was not surprised. 5 years of attrition warfare had devastated the Valkyrie economy. Abandoned trade routes, paralyzed productive systems, widespread rationing. The population was exhausted, hungry, and desperate for peace. They were doing the math. 73 lives in exchange for ending the nightmare. The Valkyrie Governance Council tried to resist. They broadcast speeches about imperial honor and never bowing to inferior species. But speeches did not feed hungry populations. They did not restore a collapsed economy. They did not bring back dead officers or abandoned stations. 3 days after Sarah's transmission, riots began. Not random violence, but targeted action. The Valkyrie population, using information provided by the humans themselves, marched to the residences of the 73 listed officers. The government itself, facing complete internal collapse, was forced to choose between preserving 73 individuals or preserving the entire social structure. The decision was inevitable. Sarah received the official transmission from the lead facilitator of the Galactic Council 48 hours after initiating the siege. Admiral Chen. The Valkyrie government has agreed to the terms. The listed individuals will be transferred to Galactic Council custody for formal judgment. Legal representatives from both parties will be permitted. The process will be publicly broadcast to ensure transparency. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not exactly peace, not completely satisfaction, but a sense that the moral arc of the universe, though long, had finally bent towards justice. "We accept the terms," she responded, "and we add one condition. Earth will be admitted as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all associated rights and protections. Our future colonies will have guaranteed sovereignty status, and any species that considers attacking humans in the future will have full access to the archives of this campaign." There was a pause before the facilitator responded. "The Council agrees. Welcome to the galactic community, Admiral, although the circumstances are less celebratory than ideal." Sarah disconnected the communication and looked through the viewports at the fleet around her. 217 ships crewed by humans who 5 years ago barely knew alien life existed. Humans who had learned, adapted, and overcome because the alternative was to accept unpunished injustice. Marcus appeared beside her on the bridge. "We did it," he said calmly. "They will pay for what they did." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained grave. "We achieved justice, but we will never recover what was lost. 40 million people are still dead. Families are still destroyed. The price we paid for this moment was too high." She touched the small locket she wore around her neck. Inside, a photo of her younger brother, frozen forever at 23. "But at least now, the entire galaxy knows humans are not easy prey. They are not resources to be exploited. We are a species that turns trauma into determination, grief into purpose, and injustice into action. And we never, ever forget." 10 years after the first bombardment, Nexus Station prepared for the most broadcast event in galactic history. The Chamber of Justice, a structure annexed to the Galactic Council, had been specially adapted to accommodate the trial of the 73 Valkyrie officers held responsible for crimes against humanity. Ambassador Thelkar observed the preparations with a mixture of admiration and melancholy. His own species had taken centuries to achieve the same result that humans managed in a decade, and where the Elder Confederation had accepted a private agreement of justice, humans insisted on full transparency. Every moment of the trial would be broadcast in real time to 500 star systems. Every member species of the Council would have full access to the evidence. There would be no secret rooms or backroom negotiations, only justice applied under universal observation. Sarah Chen, now not only Admiral but also lead ambassador of Earth to the Galactic Council, arrived at the station accompanied by a delegation of 100 humans. Each had lost family in the bombings. Each represented millions of silenced voices. Among them were Marcus Foster, now Minister of Earth Technology, and Elena Rodriguez, Director of Interstellar Relations, the generation that survived not only to tell the story, but to ensure it would never be forgotten. The first day of the trial set precedents. The lead facilitator, serving as neutral judge, presented the charges: deliberate genocide against civilian populations, forced enslavement of a sentient species, violation of first contact protocols established by the Galactic Council. The 73 accused were physically present, contained in stasis fields that allowed communication but prevented movement. Their defense lawyers, provided by the Council itself to ensure a fair process, argued mitigating circumstances. They were following orders, They operated under a military culture that did not recognize humans as equally sentient. They acted within the legal parameters of their own justice system. Sarah listened in silence before rising to present humanity's case. Honored facilitator, observing members of the council, we did not come here seeking revenge. Revenge would be to bomb the Vokri world as they bombed ours. Revenge would be to enslave their population as they enslaved ours. She activated a hologram that filled the chamber. Faces, thousands of them. Children smiling. Elderly people in parks. Artists, scientists, teachers, ordinary workers, living everyday lives. We came seeking recognition. Recognition that these were not just statistics, they were people, each with a name, with a story, with dreams that will never be realized. The hologram shifted, now showing London at the moment of the attack, but not the bombing itself. It showed the second before. A child buying ice cream, an elderly couple holding hands, a student running to catch the train, and then absence. 40 million lives, Sarah continued, her voice firm but laden with contained emotion. Each one mattered. To someone. To family. To friends. To entire communities that will never fully recover from this loss. She turned to face the accused directly. You claim you were following orders, that you didn't know you were committing a crime. But cultural ignorance is not a valid defense when millions die. When you vaporized our cities, you did not investigate whether there were schools there, hospitals, museums preserving millennia of human history. You simply assumed that your military power gave you the right to do anything. The trial lasted 3 months. Witnesses from both sides presented evidence. Experts debated issues of galactic law and individual responsibility. There were moments of drama when victims confronted perpetrators. There were moments of reflection when even some of the accused expressed genuine remorse. But the verdict was inevitable. 72 of the accused were found guilty and sentenced to varying terms of incarceration in a Galactic Council security facility, with conditions adjusted for Vokri biology. One was acquitted after evidence showed he had attempted to prevent civilian bombardment and had been removed from command by his superiors. Sarah accepted the verdicts with the same calm she had demonstrated throughout the process. For her, the trial was never about emotional satisfaction. It was about setting a precedent, showing the galaxy that massive injustice would have consequences no matter how powerful the perpetrator. But there was one name conspicuously absent from the trial. Emperor Zarthul, the supreme leader of the Vokri Empire during the invasion, had fled 24 hours before the surrender of the other officers. His ship had disappeared into remote trade routes, presumably seeking refuge in peripheral systems not aligned with the Council. For most galactic species, this would be the end. A fugitive war criminal would eventually disappear into the vastness of space. He would be forgotten. Partial justice would be accepted as sufficient, but humans did not work that way. Sarah established a permanent department dedicated exclusively to tracking Zarthul. Utilizing the same intelligence network that had infiltrated the Empire during the war, humans monitored every clue, every rumor, every possible sighting. 10 years passed. Earth prospered as a member of the Galactic Council. Humans established colonies in 6 star systems, developed trade relations with 42 different species. They became known, galactically, not only for their resilience, but for their capacity for collaboration and innovation. But the tracking department never closed. Sarah, now 53, personally visited the offices each month. She reviewed reports, authorized resources. And then, one ordinary morning, Marcus Foster transmitted the message she had waited a decade for. "Sarah, we found him." Zathul had hidden in a remote system on the galactic rim. On a world with no council affiliation, he had assumed a false identity, living modestly in a mining colony where no one asked questions about the past. He had underestimated human patience. The capture operation was conducted with surgical precision, not through military force, but through collaboration with local authorities who were presented with the full evidence of his crimes. Even in lawless systems, genocide was universally condemned. When Sarah saw Zathul for the first time, in custody at Nexus Station, awaiting supplementary trial, she expected to feel triumph, or anger, or satisfaction. Instead, she felt only weariness. "Why?" asked the former emperor through translators, his voice laden with defeat. "Why can't you just forget? 10 years. I was just one among many. Why continue the hunt?" Sarah stared at him through the containment field. "Because each of the 40 million people you killed had a name, had a family who remembers. And as long as a single living human preserves that memory, you will never be free. It is not vengeance, Emperor. It is accountability. It is what it means to be part of a civilization that values every individual life." Zathul's trial was shorter. The evidence was irrefutable, the verdict inevitable. But for Sarah, the true meaning was not in the courtroom. It was in the message the capture sent to the entire galaxy. 3 weeks after Zathul's sentencing, Sarah gave her final speech as lead ambassador before retiring. The council chamber was full. Representatives from all member species were present. She did not speak of war. She did not speak of trials or justice. She spoke of memory. "There are cultures in this galaxy that measure time in millennia," she began. "Species that have existed for so long that individual history becomes mythical. You have developed wisdom, patience, cosmic perspective." She paused, looking around the assembly. "We humans are young, our individual lives are brief, but perhaps precisely because of this, each life matters more intensely to us. We cannot forget because we do not have millennia to dilute memory. Each generation preserves the stories of the previous one. Every name matters." Sarah touched the locket she still wore. "My brother was 23 when he died in New York City. He wanted to be an architect, to design buildings that inspired. Now the daughter he never had asks questions about him, and I answer, with details, with stories, with love." She looked directly at the Vokri delegates who now occupied a reduced seat on the council. Their empire, fragmented but not extinct. This is the lesson that humans offer the galaxy. Memory is not weakness, it is strength. It is what ensures that justice is not just an abstract concept, but an applied reality. It is what protects future generations from repeating past mistakes. Sarah concluded with words that would become the unofficial motto of human diplomacy. "We can be the best of allies, or the most relentless of enemies. The choice lies in how you treat us, because we never forget an act of kindness. And we never ever forgive injustice without demanding full accountability." 10 years after Sarah retired, living quietly on a lunar colony, the Galactic Council officially adopted the Chen Protocol, a set of guidelines for first contact and interstellar relations based on principles humans had championed since their admission. Respect for the autonomy of emerging civilization, prohibition of conquest of pre-interstellar species, individual responsibility for crimes against sentience. The empire that tried to enslave humanity became an example of what happens when these principles are violated, and humans, the species that was considered primitive and defenseless, became guardians of galactic memory. Because in the end, the greatest weapon humans possessed was not technology or military force. It was the absolute refusal to forget, and the unwavering determination to ensure every injustice was answered, no matter how long it took. End of story. If humanity's tenacity and its tireless determination to seek justice have inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more chronicles from the galactic frontier. Because among the stars, when ancient civilizations forget the value of every individual life, it is the human newcomers who remind the universe that memory is power and that true justice never expires.